Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at noon, Pyongyang's response to Seoul's proposal for reuniting Korean families separated since the Korean War will likely determine the direction of inter-Korean relations in the new year. Samsung Electronics reports worse than expected profits for the fourth quarter, calling into question the future profitability of the world's largest smartphone maker. Plus, the US Senate confirms Janet Yellen as the new chair of the Federal Reserve. The first woman to head the central bank will take up the post on February 1st. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Let's start with South Korea's proposal for talks with North Korea on resuming reunions for families separated since the Korean War.
As Seoul waits a response to its offer, experts say the will of the two Koreas to set up the humanitarian event will determine the direction of inter-Korean relations this year. Our Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
Will North Korea accept South Korea's proposal for a fresh round of talks this week on resuming family reunions for those separated since the Korean War? In her New Year's speech Monday, President Park Geun-hye called the humanitarian event a potential first step in opening up a new era of inter-Korean relations.
이번에 설을 맞아 지난 60년을 기다려온 연로하신 이산 가족들이 상봉하도록 해서 마음의 상처가 치유될 수 있도록 해주기를 바랍니다.
The resumption of family reunions could serve as the touchstone of inter-Korean relations this year, just like the normalization of Kaesong Industrial Complex did last year. If Pyongyang agrees to hold the event, it could mark a turning point in relations and signify friendlier ties going forward.
It'll be a first revelation of the capacity of the Kim Jong-un regime in the new year, 2014, to indicate how the regime is determined to manage inter-Korean relations.
As the South awaits the North's response, it remains hopeful, reflecting on North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's New Year's speech, in which he called for creating an atmosphere for improved ties. Analysts say Seoul's latest offer will serve as a barometer of North Korea's sincerity in mending ties with the South. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Former NBA basketball star Dennis Rodman is in North Korea again, this time to celebrate the birthday of the North Korean leader. Rodman and several former other retired NBA players will play an exhibition game against a team of North Korean players on Kim Jong-un's birthday on Wednesday, when he is believed to be turning 31. If Rodman and Kim meet, it will be the first time the North Korean leader meets with someone outside the nation following the execution of his uncle Chang Song-taek. This is the flamboyant basketball star's fourth trip to the reclusive nation as part of what he calls basketball diplomacy. U.S. officials, however, have criticized Rodman for the trips and said the focus should be on the brutality of the North Korean regime. The U.S. has urged Korea, China, and Japan to resolve their historical differences through dialogue following Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine. Although Abe has since called for meetings with Japan's Asian neighbors to explain his actions, the visit is likely to remain an obstacle to mending relations. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The U.S. government continues to take a relatively neutral stance on Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit late last month to the highly controversial Yasukuni Shrine. At a press briefing on Monday, U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Marie Harf said the issue is sensitive and countries in the region should resolve their differences through dialogue. The U.S. official did not mention whether the Yasukuni issue will come up in talks Tuesday between Secretary of State John Kerry and South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se in Washington. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has said he wants to meet with the leaders of Korea and China to explain why he visited the shrine.
As far as my visit to Yasukuni is considered, I would like to explain my true intentions directly and honestly.
Abe said Monday that dialogue is a key factor to resolve tensions with the three Northeast Asian neighbors and to maintain peace and security in the region. Abe added that he also wanted to explain his reasons for trying to amend Japan's pacifist constitution, which was imposed on Japan after the Second World War. China said Abe's repeated calls for better ties with China were deceiving. And by visiting the Yasukuni shrine, Abe had closed the door on dialogue with Beijing. Seoul was yet to respond to Abe's latest remarks, but President Park, during a New Year's press conference Monday, said any meeting between the leaders of Korea and Japan should bring about results that help the development of bilateral relations. The Yasukuni shrine honors Japan's 2.5 million war dead, including 14 Class A war criminals, and hundreds more convicted of lesser crimes. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Virginia state legislators in the U.S. will begin discussing bills this week on how the waters between Korea and Japan will be named in school textbooks. Our Sun Jang-in has more.
Efforts to promote the name East Sea for the body of water between Korea and Japan are gathering steam in the U.S. after a long campaign by a group of local residents. Virginia state legislators on Wednesday will start debating 3 bills that require all future public school textbooks used in the state to identify the body of water as both the East Sea and the Sea of Japan, which is the name currently in use. The bills were sponsored by Dave Marsden, a Democratic state senator, Tim Hugo, a Republican member of the Virginia House, and Richard Black, a Republican state senator. The three held a press conference prior to the legislative session to express their support for the bills.
Is say that if we're going to teach something to our young people, that we will reflect that teaching in our textbooks and on our maps. It's really quite that simple.
And here's what, Democrat, Republican, this is not a Democratic bill, this is not a Republican bill, this is a proper bill, this is the right thing to do. And that's why we're going to do this bill.
None of us has any interest in exacerbating any tensions or frictions between South Korea and Japan. Both nations are important allies of the United States.
A similar bill was voted down last year by the Education Committee of the Virginia Senate, but experts say the chances are high that the bills with bipartisan support will be approved this time. The state of Virginia has more than 150,000 Korean and Korean American residents. Koreans have strongly contended that the name Sea of Japan is a legacy of Japan's imperialistic past. The bills, if approved, would take effect starting on July 1st of this year. Sun Jang-in, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye has called on state-owned institutions to actively participate in the government's push to change and reform the public sector. Speaking at this year's first cabinet meeting Tuesday, President Park said it's time for public institutions that have greatly contributed to the growth of the nation to win back faith from the people. She stressed the public sector should carry out reforms by themselves rather than blaming each other for mounting debt and work closely with the government. The president added that Labour and management should cooperate in seeking ways to reduce debt and tighten up lax management, as they won't be able to provide the public with high-quality public services if they don't. Samsung Electronics has turned in a worse-than-expected earnings report card for the fourth quarter of last year, with its arch-rival Apple poised to extend its reach into the Chinese market later this month. It seems like Samsung has a tough year ahead. Yulian reports.
The world's largest smartphone maker surprised analysts with its lower-than-expected earnings announcement. Samsung Electronics said Tuesday that its operating profits reached 8.3 trillion won, or roughly $7.8 billion in the October to December period. This falls far short of the most bearish outlook of 8.8 trillion won.
First, there was the strong Korean won. They must have had a bigger inventory to clear out. Also, they seem to have given out more special bonus payments than we had expected.
The bonus payments were handed out to mark the 20th anniversary of a new marketing strategy by Samsung chairman Lee Geun-hye. The fourth quarter earnings were down 18% compared to the third quarter and were the lowest in a year. Looking ahead, analysts say Samsung Electronics will be able to pull up operating profits this quarter on the back of strong semiconductor sales. But it seems the era of explosive growth fueled by the tech giant's cutting-edge smartphones is over. A Thomson Reuters analyst forecasts single-digit growth or even shrinking growth for the tech giant's mobile division this year. This, as Samsung is poised to face fiercer international competition from its arch-rival Apple. Starting late next week, Apple will enter China's $80 billion market, challenging Samsung's market dominance there. Apple is also expected to start selling smartphones with larger screens by before the end of the year, putting it in direct competition with Samsung's Galaxy Note series. Yurian, Arirang News.
So on a happier note for Samsung now, in what is shaping up to be an epic battle, Korea's biggest electronics heavyweights Samsung and LG will go toe-to-toe as they attempt to dazzle at this year's Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Ji Myung-gil has more.
The Consumer Electronics Show 2014 is primed to pit fierce rivals Samsung and LG against each other. Both Korean tech giants are in Las Vegas with hundreds of other firms to unveil their TVs, smartphones, wearable devices, and pretty much anything else a consumer might want to buy. Samsung Electronics, the world's #1 maker of flat-screen TVs, hopes to extend its market lead with its 105-inch ultra-high-definition TV with a curved display that features state-of-the-art resolution. The UHD TV lineups feature so-called finger gesture functions, which allow users to activate the device by moving their hands over the device. LG Electronics will unveil the world's largest 77-inch curved organic light emitting diode, or OLED TV. LG says more than 70% of its smart TV lineup will eventually be equipped with WebOS. The WebOS operating system simplifies ways to control and find content on its smart TVs. Wearable devices are also one of the trends to watch in Las Vegas. Samsung is showing off its latest Galaxy Gear smartwatches, which can be linked to home appliances, allowing users to remotely control their TVs or lights with their smartwatches. LG is also pushing its wearable device, the LifeBand Touch, which offers fitness data to users as well as alerting users to phone calls and texts. Samsung and LG will also unveil a slew of connected home products, through which users will be able to connect to their home appliances via smartphones instead of through a separate smart device. The Consumer Electronics Show 2014 runs through January 10th. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
For your fill of Korean and international news. Join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
It's confirmed Janet Yellen is to become the first female chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve in its 100-year history. Our Connie Lee has more on the next in line to head the Fed and her plans to boost the U.S. economy.
With a vote of 56 to 26, the Senate has approved Democratic nominee Janet Yellen as the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. The Senate's nod on Monday makes Yellen the first female head of the U.S. Central Bank and one of the most powerful women in U.S. history, as she is set to lead a major economy. Yellen will officially take the reins on February 1st, replacing current Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, whose second four-year term expires at the end of this month. 67-year-old Yellen currently serves as the Fed's vice chair and as a supporter of the easy money policies the Fed has been pursuing under Bernanke. She's expected to continue the fight to bring unemployment down, even if that means strategies that drive inflation higher. When voting time came, the Republicans who voted against her were those against the Fed's aggressive $85 billion a month bond buying program.
even though the Fed decided to taper the monthly purchases down to $75 billion starting January. At her first public appearance as nominee to succeed Bernanke last November, Yellen said she would follow in her predecessor's footsteps on quantitative easing. Previously, Yellen served as president of the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank and also governor of the Fed Board and chair of President Bill Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Iran has indicated that it is not interested in a U.S. suggestion that it take a sideline role in Syrian peace talks set to open later this month in Switzerland. U.S. officials have suggested Tehran could play a helpful role from the outside by working with Damascus to stop the bombardment of civilians and improve humanitarian access. Syrian opposition groups and Washington, which accuse Iran of supporting the Syrian government during the uprising against President Bashar al-Assad, have long had reservations about Iran taking part. The so-called Geneva II Peace Conference is scheduled to open in Montreux, Switzerland on January 22nd. The Iraqi Prime Minister is calling on residents of the embattled city of Fallujah to expel insurgents linked to al-Qaeda who have taken control there. In a statement read out on state television on Monday, Nouri al-Maliki urged Iraqis to help the government and the military fight terrorists to avoid an all-out battle. The message came as hundreds of people fled Fallujah, located close to the capital, Baghdad, as government forces have been bombarding the area in an attempt to recapture the city. Sunni militants took over parts of Iraq's western Anbar province last week after Iraq's Shia-led government invaded their protest camp last month. The Sunni Arabs in Iraq accused the government of marginalizing them from society.
The Korean Peninsula was hit by a record 93 earthquakes last year. Experts say the surge is a result of the massive 2011 earthquake that devastated parts of Japan and triggered a tsunami that caused the Fukushima nuclear disaster. These experts also warn that it could make it possible for a much more powerful earthquake to strike Korea in the future. Kim Min-ji reports.
The Korean Peninsula's sixth largest earthquake struck Jeollanam-do on April 21st. It had a magnitude of 4.9, which was large enough to rattle a passenger ship terminal in the area, as you can see from this CCTV footage. It was just one of the 93 earthquakes to hit the peninsula last year, according to the Korea Meteorological Administration, a record since the agency began compiling data in 1978. 52 earthquakes were detected in the West Sea alone, with the waters off of Poryang having the most at 33. The KMA said, however, that the surge in quake occurrences is not a prelude to a larger earthquake.
Because the magnitudes of the earthquakes were small, it is hard to say that they are a sign of a great earthquake.
Researchers, however, disagree. One Korean seismologist said he has found evidence that the 2011 Tohoku earthquake, which triggered the meltdowns and subsequent nuclear disaster at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, had an impact on the Korean peninsula. He said that the source of the quakes that occurred in the Poryang waters moved from northeast to southwest, which means that an active fault could have been established in the West Sea following the Tohoku quake.
As for the earthquakes in the Poryang waters, there is a quake fault zone stretching from the northeast to the southwest.
Experts say that the Korean peninsula is no longer an earthquake safe zone, and many have called for a comprehensive study of the seismic activity in the region. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, for those of us who like to reach for an alcoholic beverage or two every now and again, a recent Korean health study might give us some pause for thought. Stomach pains, gastric inflammation and even ulcers are among the many afflictions for heavy drinkers, especially middle-aged men. Our Paul Lee reports.
Year-end toasts paired with tapping glasses and plenty of cheers is a common sight these days in Korea. But waking up the next day can be a little rough.
If I drink and have 2 bottles of soju, the next day I feel so tired, so I just have some ramen noodles.
If my stomach is hurting a bit, I usually have cup noodles or foods with soup.
But for a growing number of heavy drinkers, these typical symptoms can quickly worsen to painful burning, vomiting, and sharp aches. Upon closer inspection, this particular patient is suffering from chronic gastritis, which includes inflammation and bleeding of the stomach.
Throughout this month, I was in the position where I was drinking almost every day. Then one day, I had a very serious pain in my stomach, so I quickly came to get an endoscopy exam.
According to Korea's Health Insurance Review and Assessment Service, 72% of alcohol-related gastritis patients last year were men, compared to only 28% of women. The health agency also found that men in their 50s were at the highest risk of developing the gastric disease. A large percentage of middle-aged Korean men said they took to drinking due to business reasons or high levels of stress. Without proper medical treatment and reduced alcohol intake, gastritis can potentially lead to ulcers and bacterial infections.
There are people who drink a lot of alcohol, then take hangover drinks. But the effect of these hangover drinks on alcohol toxicity is not fully known. Therefore, it's best to drink in moderate amounts over a reasonable amount of time.
It's recommended that you avoid eating spicy and salty foods when drinking, which could further irritate your stomach lining. And remember, moderation is the key to enjoying another year of health and prosperity. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
Right, well, it's that time in the newscast where we get a check on the weather with our wonderful weathercaster Lee Ji-yeon, who's standing by, as always, on a weekday at the Weather Center. Hello there to Ji-yeon.
Well, good afternoon, Mark and Yusan. Well, the temperature today will be higher than yesterday in most regions, but the level of fine dust particles will be relatively higher in the capital region, so be sure to wear a face mask before heading out. And the sky will also get cloudier before dropping a mix of rain and snow on the region early tomorrow morning. Now, tomorrow, Jeju and Busan will be rainy throughout the day, and the rest of the country will get a dusting of snow and rain. But all of that should start to let up in the northern parts of the country sometime in the morning hours. Now, the precipitation will take temperatures down to freezing. The Seoul metro area will start out at -9 and will only get up to -4 on Thursday, and it will be even colder on Friday. But it's going to be mild today, and here's a look at today's temperatures. The high in Seoul will peak at 7, while Daegu and Gwangju will climb to 9, and Busan will see a high of 12. Now, for other regions, it looks like the high in Jeju will get up to 13, Daejeon will peak at 8, and the top temperature on Mount Kumgang will be -3. Now, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world. That's all from me today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And back to Mark and Yusan in the studio.
Thank you very much, Jion, for the weather there. And that does it for this Tuesday edition of Newsline at noon.
We'll be back tomorrow at the same time here in Seoul.